An exciting discovery was recently made that could alter the way we think about one of the most famous artifacts from Northern Europe and perhaps the whole world, the Sutton Hoo helmet. A stamp discovered using a metal detector on the Danish island of Torsinge suggests that the iconic helmet from Sutton Hoo in England might have been crafted in the South Funen archipelago. This remarkable find has the potential to reshape our understanding of the power balance in Northern Europe during the 7th century, pointing to Denmark as playing a more central role than previously believed. The Sutton Hoo helmet is among Great Britain's most celebrated archaeological treasures, and it is often referred to as the British Tutankhamun. And it has quite the story. Until now, we believed it originated in Uppland in Sweden, where similar decorative motifs featuring mounted warriors, like the one found on the Sutton Hoo helmet, have been uncovered. But this recent find from Torsinge displays a striking similarity to one of the motifs on the helmet, and this could lead to a significant reassessment of both the origins of the helmet and the political dynamics in Europe around the 600 AD. Some essential information about Sutton Hoo first. So, the helmet was buried in southeastern England, in Suffolk, at the beginning of the 7th century. It was part of a very elaborate ship burial befitting a king. It did remain hidden for more than 1,000 years until it was unearthed during an archaeological excavation in 1939, a so called rescue dig, because we were on the cusp of the Second World War. And the excavation was conducted by Stuart and Peggy Piggott after an exploratory excavation conducted by Basil Brown. In the 60s, a plaster mold of the ship was made, and it was also confirmed that the acidic soil destroyed the body that was laid there to rest. Interestingly, in the 90s, a burial with two chambers was also revealed nearby, with one chamber containing the skeleton of a horse, potentially a sacrifice. So the whole funerary landscape would have been more complex than just this ship burial, an assembly of high status burial mounds, as well as a whole cemetery complex. This is, of course, the most striking one, with the ship measuring about 27 meters. And also, it appears that it was functional because it does have traces of repair as well. The whole ensemble resembles what you can find in southern Sweden, and combined with some elements from the poem Beowulf, this led us to believe in the Swedish connection. It's not the only ship burial in Britain. There is one more in Suffolk at Snape Common, dated to around 550 AD, in a wider cemetery of cremation and inhumation. So the main question that arose was who in this corner of Suffolk could have held sufficient power to warrant such an elaborate ship burial. The most logical answer to this day is that most likely it was King Redwald of East Anglia. We know from datable objects in the tomb that the burial probably dates to about 625, and we know from the written sources that Redwald died around 624. The richness of the finds also suggests that. I'm not only talking about the helmet here, but there is also a gold belt buckle, shoulder clasps, an ornamented shield, a purse with a lid depicting people dressed up as animals, a sword with gold fittings, and a pommel inlaid with garnet. So spectacular objects have been found here, and also a little bit further away from the burial ship, most prominent among them being a set of 3 hanging bowls made of copper alloy. Sutton Hoo also yielded a large quantity of silver, as can be seen in the example of the 10 bowls with Greek-style crosses. And speaking of that, there seems to have been a religious mix going on in the funerary complex. We do know that Redwald converted to Christianity at the court of Ethelbert of Kent sometime before 605, but he maintained a pagan temple and even had a pagan wife. This is something we know from Bede the Venerable, who wrote the ecclesiastical history of the English people. He also describes the relationship between the two of them ambiguously, with Redwald holding military command of his troops, but Ethelbert of Kent held governmental rule, something for which Bede uses the term imperium, so military power was not enough for authority. After the death of Ethelbert, however, Redwald would have acquired enough power for Bede to name him Rex Anglorum, so King of the English, although we are not sure of the extent of his authority and we do not have a unified England at this time. Interestingly, during a conflict between Ethelfrith of Northumbria and his brother in law Edwin, Redwald also gets involved. He leads an army north and defeats Ethelfrith at the Battle of the River Idle, after which Edwin becomes king. But because he has this debt of allegiance to Redwald, Redwald comes to hold quite significant influence in Northumbria as well, actually being the first foreigner to do so. Coming back to the Sutton Hoo helmet, this was found shattered into hundreds of pieces. But despite this, it was painstakingly reconstructed twice by experts, revealing intricate designs like the crest with dragons, with red garnets, animal interlace, riders, including the motif of a mounted warrior trampling a figure lying beneath the horse. And it is this very motif that has now been linked to Torsinger in the South Funen archipelago in Denmark, where a distinctive type of stamp known as a patrice was found by a metal detectorist. To produce a design, a thin sheet of metal is placed atop the patrice and hammered, thus imprinting the motif onto the surface. The stamp was submitted to the Svendborg Museum before being transferred to the National Museum of Denmark. When comparing the motif on the newly discovered patrice from Torsinger with the mounted warrior seen on the Sutton Hoo helmet and similar examples from Sweden, it becomes clear that the Torsinger find bears a much closer resemblance to the English helmet than to the Swedish artifacts. If you look carefully, you can identify notable similarities, minute details, such as the cuff on the warrior's wrist, the hairstyle, the almond shaped harness fitting on the horse's head, the reins, the sword extending below the warrior's shield, and the distinctive circular shapes, sometimes referred to as bunions, on the feet of the fallen man. In contrast, the Swedish counterparts typically feature wild boars or birds of prey on the helmet, and these motifs are largely absent from both the Sutton Hoo helmet and the newly found patrice from Torsinger. So, this new evidence suggests that the Sutton Hoo helmet might have actually been produced in Denmark rather than Sweden. If it turns out that the helmet that was clearly worn by someone of exceptional status, possibly a king such as Redwald, was made in Torsinger, it would definitely be a revelation, and we need to update the information. It not only points to a possible Danish origin for the helmet, but also implies a Danish connection to the individual who wore it and was buried with it. The link between Torsinger and Sutton Hoo could turn out to be even more significant. In addition to the first motif of a mounted warrior, the Sutton Hoo helmet also features another depiction of a mounted warrior, but this time only a few fragments of the second motif have been recovered, making it quite difficult to reconstruct the full image. A close examination of the details on the fragments, however, reveals an even stronger resemblance to the motif on the Torsinger stamp. Two particular features stand out. The first is a series of lines near the horseman's foot, which appear identically on both the stamp and the fragment, but are missing from other known motifs. And the second one would be the distinctive shape of the shield's edge held by the man lying beneath the horse, which also matches between the fragment and the Torsinger patrice. The remarkable similarity between the fragmented motif and the stamp suggests that not only might they have originated from the same region, but they might have also been created by the same group of craftsmen. It is true that many motifs, even from distant locations, clearly influenced each other, but this degree of similarity is quite striking. It suggests that the items were not just inspired by a common source, but might have actually been produced in the same place and perhaps by the same hands. That would offer compelling evidence that the Sutton Hoo helmet was in fact manufactured in Torsinger. Just how closely the fragment and the stamp correspond might be confirmed through an upcoming 3D scan of both the patrice and the helmet fragments. So, ongoing research. If it turns out that the Sutton Hoo helmet was actually crafted in or near Torsinger, it could alter previous assumptions about Denmark's role in the political and cultural landscape of Northern Europe around the year 600. To date, no burial sites in Denmark match the grandeur of the ship burials found in England and Sweden from this area, so the Merovingian period or the late Iron Age. And this might mean that Denmark held a marginal position during this period, at least in comparison to other regions. But this new discovery provides a firmer basis for thinking that at least parts of Denmark might have held considerable influence at the time, perhaps even ranking among leading powers in Northern Europe. The ornate helmets and the ship burials unearthed in regions of Sweden and England might reflect a strong cultural and political alignment with Denmark as some sort of central authority. The discovery in Torsinger leads further support to this theory. However, it does not constitute definitive evidence. And we need to take into account that such a small stamp, measuring only about 4 centimeters, could easily have traveled great distances. The stamp might not indicate that the helmet was made in Denmark, but that craftsmen or tools moved across regions through trade or even marriage alliances or patronage networks. The stamp could have belonged to a craftsman who had once worked or had contact with artisans from England or Sweden. And the patrice, so the stamp itself, could have been imported into Denmark either as a finished tool or part of a toolkit belonging to a foreign craftsman. Alternatively, the design might have been copied from another object that was imported. The presence of the stamp in Denmark does not confirm local production, but might reflect the movement of prestige goods and tools across elite networks. The stamp could have been a local copy of a motif that was originally created elsewhere, such as Sweden, and this kind of emulation was quite common among the elites who were mainly interested in displaying status through prestigious styles. So there are alternative explanations to this whole situation that we need to take into consideration as well. All in all, the find does suggest that Denmark might have played a more prominent role during this period than previously believed. Usually, when we think of Denmark in the early Middle Ages, we typically think of Harald Bluetooth, with credited with unifying the Danish kingdom, or at least a large part of it in the 10th century. However, parts of Denmark could have been more cohesive and influential than previously thought as early as the 7th century. So it's a discovery that challenges some of the established narratives, and that is always exciting. Well, hope you enjoyed this video. If you have, please consider subscribing if you haven't done so already. And I do recommend that you continue with my video on the Hjelmenbu helmet, the complete Viking Age helmet from Norway. And I also have a more recent video about a recent discovery, a piece of a helmet, but equally interesting. Thank you so much for listening or watching. This was Irina, and till next time.